Good morning, my name is Gail Rami, and today I'm going to talk about anorexia and its relationship with the digestive system. Anorexia is an eating disorder and metabolic condition that results in excessive weight loss and extreme thinness caused by self-starvation. It is characterized by a severe malnutrition and intense fear of gaining weight and a disturbed self-body image. It is a combination of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. Psychological factors include a high level of perfectionism, obsessive-compulsive personality, low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and stress. The environmental factors include poverty, stressful life events, and relationship problems, and the biological factors include extreme dieting that can affect the balance of hormones in the body, affecting how the brain functions. Some risk factors include occupations where the demand of a thin body may increase the risk of anorexia, like in the fashion industries. There are also cultural pressures like media influencing people to be thin. Genetic predispositions can arise from genes inherited from parents. Anorexia nervosa often runs in families, suggesting that there may be a genetic cause. Finally, dieting and starvation. Starvation affects the brain and influences mood changes, rigidity in thinking, anxiety, and reduction in appetite. Starvation and weight loss may change the way the brain functions in vulnerable individuals, which may perpetuate restrictive eating, and it may difficult the return to normal eating habits. Some of the symptoms of anorexia include extreme weight loss, fatigue, dizziness, thin hair that breaks, soft, downy hair covering the body, absence of menstruation in women, abdominal pain, dry yellowish skin, low blood pressure, dehydration, restrictive food intake, exercising excessively, a flat mood, and the denial of hunger. And some complications that may come with anorexia include anemia, arrhythmias, osteoporosis, electrolyte abnormalities, absence of period in women, decreased testosterone in men, gastrointestinal problems, the loss of muscle, and kidney problems. There are two main types of anorexia. The purging time, that consists of eating large amount of food in a large amount of time and then self-inducing vomiting or the misuse of laxatives. And also the restrictive type, where the person will not eat food at all. The diagnosis of anorexia consists of four main steps. First, the physical exploration. This consists of measuring height and weight, monitoring vital signs such as heart rate, blood pressure, and temperature, checking skin and nail problems, and listening to the heart and lungs. There can also be a laboratory analysis, which consists of a test of a complete blood count and blood test to monitor electrolytes and proteins, as well as liver, kidney, and thyroid functions. Also, a urine test may be done. Other steps include the psychological note, where a mental professional asks questions about the patient's feelings and eating habits, also about self-esteem. Finally, other tests include X-rays to check for bone density, detect fractures from overload bones, detect pneumonia or heart problems, and electrocardiograms to detect cardiac irregularities. So, what happens to the body? When a person goes through a fasted state, the body will set in motion different mechanisms to continue supplying fuel to the organs despite the fact that no fuel is being supplied from the intestines. Some of the main concepts to understand anorexia include glucose, the main type of sugar in the blood, and it is a major source of energy for the body cells. Insulin, a hormone produced in the pancreas which regulates the amount of glucose in the blood. Glucagon, also a hormone produced in the pancreas that regulates the amount of glucose in the blood. Glycogen, a substance deposited in the body tissues as a store of carbohydrates. It is a polysaccharide which forms from glucose on hydrolysis. Pyruvate, which is the end product of glycolysis, which is converted into acetyl-CoA, which will enter the Krebs cycle to perform cell respiration. Lactate, the final byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis, and glycerol, liquid obtained by the fermentation of glucose that can be converted into long-chain fatty acids. The body's first response will be to maintain blood glucose constant. Then, the peptide hormone glucagon will stimulate the breakdown of glycogen. Then, as the glucose level falls, the pancreas alpha cells will release glucagon. The liver breaks down glycogen, activating an enzyme called glycogen phosphorylase and releasing glucose, so then the blood level rises. But why glycogen? Glycogen is an energy reserve polysaccharide which forms branched chains of glucose and is soluble in water. Furthermore, it has a relatively simple mobilization, allowing it to be the first to mobilize and be assimilated by different tissues. In this way, the action of glycogen will cause glucose to be synthesized in the liver, which is sent to the blood to be exported to other organs when necessary. But this is not enough, as the process can only last from 12 to 24 hours. Mobilization is the release of a substance stored in the body into the circulation from bodily use. Assimilation is the movement of digested food molecules into cells in the body where they are used. When glycogen reserves are emptied, the body emits a signal to stimulate glucose formation from other precursors, such as lactate of lactic fermentation in muscles. A precursor is a substance from which another is formed, and lactic fermentation is when muscle cells can produce lactic acid to provide energy. Lactic acid then turns into lactate by giving away a hydrogen ion. Remember that this is an anaerobic process, so there is no oxygen involved. In muscle cells, glycogen breaks down to produce glucose, and as a result, in addition to energy production, pyruvate is formed, which through lactic fermentation will transform into lactate in white muscle fibers and red blood cells. Pyruvate is the end product of glycolysis, which is converted into acetyl-CoA and will be used in cell respiration. And white muscle cells are those that contract really fast and with a lot of force, but they can't sustain the contraction for very long before tiring out. They are anaerobic. Then, through the Cori cycle, lactate is transported to the liver, where it will be converted into pyruvate, which will serve as a substrate to produce glucose that is sent to the non-liver tissues. Here in this image we can see a diagram of how the Cori cycle functions, and here we can see the difference between lactic acid and lactate and how it forms by giving away a hydrogen ion. At the same time, glycerol and fatty acids will pass to the liver, where they will be metabolized and distributed as needed. On one hand, they will be maintaining fuel for muscles, and on the other hand, they will degrade into ketone bodies as energy fuel from the brain. Ketone bodies are chemicals that the body makes when there is not enough insulin in the blood and it must break fat instead of sugar glucose for energy. But why fatty acids? Well, they provide a lot of energy, as one glucose molecule provides 30 ATPs, but fatty acids can produce up to 108 ATPs. 1 gram of fat is equivalent to 4 grams of glucose. However, its mobilization is complicated, so the body prefers using glucose as fuel instead. This is how the body implements different mechanisms in order to continue supplying energy even if it is not getting it from the food. On day 20 of lack of nutrition, the massive proteolysis of muscle proteins begins, causing a great loss of body mass. From the month to the lack of food, the absence of food ends up affecting all the systems, and there are already very serious problems for speech and mobility. About 50 to 55 days, you already begin to enter a phase of unconsciousness and coma until you die from starvation. Other diseases that can come with anorexia include the Mallory-Weiss syndrome. Here, the esophagus can be affected from the self-inducing vomiting, as tears in it can be formed, causing gastrointestinal bleeding, and the person can have abdominal pain as well as vomiting blood. There can also be acute gastric dilatation, and it occurs as malnutrition causes the muscles of the gastrointestinal tract to be weak, leading to an overall slower movement of food and waste removal. This can be accompanied by an irreversible stretching of the stomach and an inability to vomit. It can lead to the death of gastric tissue, decreased blood flow to organs, or rupturing of the stomach due to the weakened muscles. Sialadenosis is also another disease, and this is a non-inflammatory disease that causes swelling of the salivary glands. Gastroparesis is a disease of the stomach muscles. It affects the nerves that control the muscles, such as the vagus nerve, preventing the muscles from functioning properly. Muscles can be lost in the digestive system, so the stomach is not able to digest food and empty it into the intestine properly. Intestinal microbiota and anorexia nervosa. The research I read focused on the role of intestinal microorganisms in the functional gastrointestinal disorders associated with anorexia. I found that among the different biological factors involved in this eating disorder, identification of an intestinal microbiota dysbiosis in individuals with anorexia has opened a new line of research. As intestinal microbiota, which corresponds to the community of microorganisms living in the intestine, has recently been involved in weight regulation, fat storage, and energy harvest from diet. as well as in eating behavior, anxiety, and depression. Why gut microbiota may be a critical player during anorexia nervosa? The intestinal microbiota is an ecosystem composed by bacteria, archaea, microeukaryotes, and viruses living in symbiotic relationships with the human hosts. The functions performed by intestinal microorganisms include digestion and fermentation of nutrients, in particular carbohydrates and amino acids, and the production of essential metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids and vitamin B and K. In addition, the microbiota plays a key role in the development of the stimulation of the immune system and constitutes an efficient barrier against pathogens. Dietary changes induce microbial shifts, and malnutrition can lead to gut microbiota imbalance, also called dysbiosis, and a change in its composition may be done. Anorectic patients' intestinal microbiota differ in compositions from healthy individuals, and it is strongly altered, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and it triggers the start of a vicious cycle, altering the intestinal ecosystems and making the disease worse. Studies reveal that there is an increased level in the methanogen Methanobrevibacter smithii intestinal microbiota in anorectic patients. This methanogen, in particular, improves microbial fermentation and the transformation of nutrients into calories by metabolizing hydrogen excesses from the gut into methane, which could be a response to the energy optimization from a very low-calorie diet ingested by anorectic patients. This also could be related to the constipation of methane-producing bacteria, as it has been reported in patients suffering from constipation, as methane slows the gastrointestinal motility. There was also an increase of M. smithii in the feces of anorectic patients. The resulting dysbiosis may be involved in dysfunctional gastrointestinal disorders, anxiety and depression-related disorders, as well as appetite dysregulation. Potential involvement of gut microbiota in anorexia nervosa pathophysiology. Anorexia is associated with functional gastrointestinal disorders like the delayed gastric emptying, constipation, or visceral hypersensitivity. Studies were made on rats, and in one of them, they transplanted fecal microbiota from patients with hypersensitivity to colonic distension of IBS patients was transferred to rats, and there was a disruption of the intestinal barrier and increased intestinal permeability. They show that gut microbiota plays a role in the regulation of the gut barrier permeability because of junctions in proteins expression, as it may lead to gene expression in this regulation. In anorectic patients, a decrease in intestinal permeability has been reported in the small intestine, based on urinary recovery of lactulose. Some of the main weaknesses that I found in the study were that it was made on a really small sample of only 9 anorectic patients compared to 20 normal weight healthy controls. Also, that the studies focused on bacteria recovered from feces samples, but it should be kept in mind that the actual ecosystem present in the colon or in the small intestines may diverge. Treatment options. Hospitalization is necessary in the case of medical complications, psychiatric problems, or severe malnutrition, in order to control heart rhythm disturbances, dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, or a psychiatric emergency. Medical attention is meant to control vital signs, the level of hydration and electrolytes, in addition to other related physical conditions. Sometimes it is necessary for patients to receive feeding through a tube that is placed in the nose and goes into the stomach. This is known as the nasogastric tube. The main goal is to bring patients to a healthy weight. So, with the help of dietitians who suggest eating plans, this can be achieved. Psychotherapy, either familiar or individual, it helps the patient to normalize eating habits and behaviors, and to change distorted beliefs and thoughts they may have about themselves. Medicines like antidepressant or other psychiatric medications can help treat other mental health conditions like depression or anxiety, but there is not a medicine meant for anorexia itself. As a conclusion, I would like to say that anorexia is a very serious disease that doesn't only have a psychological outcome, but also a really important one in the digestive system, as it is the person itself who is restricting the amount of food and energy intake. This was affecting the balance of the gastrointestinal tract, causing several problems such as Mallory-Weiss syndrome, acute gastric dilatation, sialodenosis, and gastroparesis, as well as a disbalance in the intestinal microbiota, bringing with them several problems for the patient, including death itself.